December 7th, 2020, Pearl Harbor Day, for those of you who have that memory. It is now 10:09 a.m., and we will dive right into the FAU Mobility Intelligence Project update. Mr. Roog.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. Chris Roog, Executive Director of the CRA. So the presentation that you're about to hear from Florida Atlantic University, Dr. Hallstrom, and I don't know, is Fanchen and Steck? Oh, okay. Are they going to be presenting? We have PhD students with us that have been working on this project as well. So the Mobility Intelligence Project is an initiative that started last year and came out of a brainstorming session with top staff and the former administration of the city of West Palm Beach to really understand how people are using our city and how they're moving around. So this was a project that is also a financial partnership between the Knight Foundation and the Community Foundation. The project totals out to be about $600,000 over a 3-year period, where the city is committed to $300,000 of that $100,000 per year. So we've already funded the first year of the project, and we're heading into the second year. The Knight Foundation is contributing $225, and the Community Foundation is contributing $75,000. So the project is completely funded, and as the first year has been under our belt, I felt it was prudent for Dr. Hallstrom and his team to give you all an update of where we are with the project currently. We do have sensors up on Clematis Street. Right now, the project is slated to focus primarily on Clematis Street from the train station to the Intercoastal to really start understanding how people are using Clematis Street and the different facilities there. But I won't get into too much of it. I'll let Dr. Hallstrom talk about all the technicalities. But this is also very exciting because this project is now, because of the infrastructure in place and what they're doing, is also being able to be leveraged for other grant opportunities with the National Science Foundation that Dr. Hallstrom will also be able to talk about. So it's really embracing this idea that our city is a laboratory where we can do a lot of experimental studies and ways that not only impact and make our city better from a public policy standpoint, but also maybe best practices developed and shared with other cities that they may adopt, looking at West Palm Beach as a place to adopt good practices and policies. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Hallstrom. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. How do I get the thumb drive? Yeah, I have a thumb drive. Does that work better?
Yeah, that's going to be best. Try from here, right?
Thanks, yeah. Mayor James, Commissioners, Chris, thanks very much for the opportunity this morning to share the first year of results on the Mobility Intelligence Project. I have a brief presentation where I'm going to spend a little bit of time first reacquainting you with the goals of the Mobility Intelligence Project. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about how this project works overall. I'll talk about our implementation progress, and I'll share some of the successes from the first year of the project and give you a picture of what comes next in year 2. This is fundamentally a project that's focused on data collection and data analytics to answer 3 simple questions. In West Palm Beach, where do people want to go? How do they get there? And what are the obstacles that they may encounter along those paths? So I'm going to spend some time talking about technology, but this is a simple project focused on those 3 simple questions. So everything is in service of those 3 goals. We're collecting information about how people move all along Clematis Street. So we're collecting individualized mobility behaviors, how people move, how bicycles move, how cars move, So conceptually, the picture that should be in your mind is the one that you see on the slide today. And importantly, all of those circles are intentionally over people's faces. So what we see in the mobility intelligence system are dots that move through space. Those dots are color-coded to represent the kind of entity that it represents. Is that a person? Is it a bicycle? Is it a vehicle? And we have information on where that anonymized dot is located into space, the direction they're heading, and some information about how quickly they're moving in the modality. So that's fundamentally what we're collecting. So how does this system work? When you're carrying a mobile device, whether that's a smartphone or that's a watch or that's a smart amulet or whatever it might be, that device is always sending out a code that is unique to that device when it's looking for a radio network to connect to. We can listen for those unique codes that represent those individual devices, and we can measure the strength at which that signal is received. By measuring the strength of that signal from these devices that are populating our lives, we can triangulate or trilaterate the position of those devices. So to give you just a quick example of how this is working along Clematis, you have someone, or it's a car or whatever it might be, who's carrying a mobile device, and that mobile device is either connected to a wireless network or it's looking for a wireless network. And it sends out a beacon that says, hello, I'm here and I'm looking to connect. At one of our sensors, we can capture that hello message, we can measure the strength of that signal, and then that tells us something about the radius where this device might be located, the approximate distance. Now, the key trick of this whole process is that we can do that at a whole bunch of stations, and we can do it simultaneously. So that same beacon is received at another station, and another station, and another station, and using the overlap of those regions, we can figure out approximately where someone is along Clematis Street. And we can do that very, very quickly, approximately in real time. So that's how the system functions. Now, looking at the plan that we presented, this is the slide that was presented back in early 2019 when we were putting together the plans for this program. And this is the structure. By putting sensing endpoints all along Clematis, we can capture those radio messages and we can triangulate the position of those devices and track them over time. By collecting that information over time and sort of piecing the breadcrumbs together of where those dots are located, then we capture information about trajectory behaviors and path behaviors. So precisely how people are walking along the street, how folks are moving in their cars, how bicycles might be moving, how scooters might be being collected and dropped off, all that kind of information. And it's used to develop two types of descriptive analytics that are represented in those two graphics on the slide. The first is just a simple, effectively a pedestrian count, potentially by type of business. So you could say, on this date, between these times, how many pedestrians were within coffee shops? How many pedestrians were within retail centers, et cetera, et cetera. The second visualization that you see on the far right of that slide in the bottom is about trajectory, so visualizing those paths. When I think about what that visualization looks like, it looks a lot like a spaghetti model from a hurricane forecast. So you're seeing how everyone is moving through space, and there's some degree of uncertainty because we don't have specific information on where people are, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. So that's how it works. So now what I want to do is I want to spend some time talking about where are we. So this is largely what we said we would do, and now I want to talk about what we've done. This is what the implementation looks like. So the sensor that collects those signals, those hello messages from mobile devices, is a small device. You see a picture of it here mounted on a pole, and then you have a zoomed in view. This contains a small computer. It contains a small backup battery. These are wall powered, and then it just includes radios that are used to collect those messages and to communicate to the cloud. So the model is to collect information about mobility, to stream that information to the cloud, where it's stored, it's fully anonymized, and it's used for data analytics and for visualization. So today, along Clematis, we have 13 of these sensors deployed. We have 4 additional that have been prepared. They're not yet deployed, but they're ready. In 2021, we expect to deploy at least 17 more units along Clematis. And we've been working very closely with Chris and with the city to understand where does it make the most sense to deploy these sensors, because after all, the data is for the city. So we're interested in addressing questions the city has about pedestrian behavior, not questions that FAU has. So these are to be deployed in those areas that provide the most value to the city. Now, there's a portal where all this information is made public. It has a rather unfortunate name. I think if we were to go back in time, we would not call this the Mob Intel system, because it sounds, it's not that kind of mob intel. It's mobility intelligence. And that system is available today. You can go to mobintel.org. It provides an interface for you to select individual sensors along Clematis and to view pedestrian count information, to view vehicle count information, to view trends over time. I think the data that's been collected, because we began collecting this information back in early January, the information that we've collected is quite interesting. It's quite interesting, particularly because of the significant changes that we've observed in mobility as a result of the pandemic. So I'm going to show you just a little bit of that data to give you a sense of how behaviors have changed over time. So this is a zoomed-in view. So in the top right, this is just a snapshot of the screen that was taken when using the MobIntel website. We zoomed in on one particular sensor and we looked at pedestrian count information, the number of pedestrians that were in view of that sensor over time. So the plot that you see here is from October 25th until the 6th of November, and not surprisingly, we saw peak pedestrian counts on October 31st, Halloween. Now, if we zoom back even further and we look back to January, now we have to sort of keep in mind that in January we didn't have all 14 sensors installed. So we're going to continue focusing only on one sensor, looking at just the number of folks who were within view of that sensor from January until early November. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I missed a slide. There we go. So this gives you a view of what counts looked like over time from about January 22nd until the 5th of November, and it's quite striking, right? So of course, in March, when the restrictions were put in place through the state and through the federal government, we saw a significant decline in pedestrian behavior all along Clematis, and of course things started to sort of come back up as we began to loosen those restrictions. And of course now, we're looking at data from early November, we're back at peak pedestrian traffic, very close to what we saw even in 2019, in late 2019. This is the kind of information that can be collected through the system. Now, the other interesting question that we might be interested in is dwell time. So, yes, it's interesting to know that at noon on October 31st, we had peak pedestrian traffic, but that doesn't tell us anything about how much time those pedestrians spent at a business, how much time they spent in a particular area. It might have been, I'm making up numbers, it might have been 2,000 people at noon, 2,000 different people at 1. So we're interested in, if we took a snapshot of the population at noon, how long did that population of people stay at that location? What was their dwell time at that business or at that area within the city? And that's the other feature that the website provides. So if you click on one of those, if you click on a point within that graph that shows total pedestrian behavior, then you have the persistence graph or the dwell time graph that shows you how long did that population stay at that location. So the way to interpret this graph, if you were to click October 31st at noon on the top graph and you had, I'm making numbers up, but 2,000 people at that location, at that moment, 100% of that original population was present in that area. Now, 10 minutes later, 50% of that original population has moved on to some other point within the city, but the original 50% has stayed, and so on and so on and so on. And so we can see that by about 40 minutes later, only about 28% of the original population was present in that space. So this tells us something important about how many people are dwelling at that location beyond just how many people walked by that location. So that's what's available through the website today. I encourage you to take a look and to play with it. So now, what is the current focus? So now we have great information about counts. We have great information about patterns over time. And now we want to have that trajectory information. So we want to be able to take these dots on a map that are collected over time, and we want to piece them together into trajectories that represent how people actually moved. Now, that sounds like an easy problem, because if we give you a map and we draw dots in space where one person walked along the city, of course we can draw a path through. But the challenge we have is that our dots are fully anonymous. And so now we have a bunch of dots on a map representing hundreds or thousands of people without any identity information across the dots. And so how do you connect them? And so I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the challenges here. So the first challenge. So the view that you see on the bottom of that slide represents 5 sensors. So you have 5 sensors, and those sensors have the ability to estimate where someone walked through space. And so what you see now is a visualization of one potential estimate of how someone moved through the path of those sensors. So challenge 1 is that there's some noise in the system. We're not accurate down to centimeter level for reasons that I'll talk about in just a little bit. So there's some noise in the data. So it could well be that the actual path looked like that, looked different than the path that was originally estimated. And because of this anonymization issue that I mentioned, we don't even know that those breadcrumbs all belong to the same bird, right? They're different paths through space. So it could well be that that's what the actual trajectories of the people looked like. So the key takeaway is that because we have adopted anonymity first as the foundation of this technology project, it comes with some challenges in taking the data we have and reconstructing paths that are meaningful. One challenge is a result of just inherent noise in signal traffic, and one is a result of anonymity. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. So how are we handling this? So now what you see is a picture on the left-hand side of FAU's test setup. If you were to drive by this area of campus, which is just adjacent to the Boca Regional Airport, on virtually any day of the week, you will see Fan Chen and Stepan out there walking a grid. So they've put together a grid in space where you have 4 sensors, one on each corner of this grid in a large parking lot. And they're running field experiments where they're walking with an emitting device, and they're walking through this grid at regular intervals, collecting data. And they're using that data to train machine learning tools that can tweeze those breadcrumbs apart and improve the accuracy of where those breadcrumbs are located. So fundamentally what is happening is that we're learning by walking these paths over and over and over and collecting data and applying these tools. We're learning the shape of signal interference, of signal noise, and we're learning how to piece these breadcrumbs together. I'm not going to go into the data that you see on the far right, but that's data that represents, Fan Chen or Stepan will have to correct me, I want to say it's something like 45,000 different samples. More? How many more? A few 100,000, I was off. What's a few 100,000 among friends? So lots and lots of data is being collected to apply these machine learning tools to be able to piece these trajectories together accurately. Now, to give you a sense of what our earliest results looked like, you see 4 different graphs. I'm going to have you ignore for now the one on the right-hand side. So you see 4 different graphs on the left-hand side. 3 of those have little brain icons in the top left-hand corner. Those represent results that were generated from the models that Fan Chen and Stepan have built, the machine learning models, the AI-driven models. Now, in each of these graphs, you see 2 different paths. One path represents how Fan Chen or Stepan actually walked through the field, how they walked through the test grid. And the second curve shows you what the system thought they did. So the closer those 2 lines, the better the system is doing in tracking where that pedestrian is located in 3 space. The takeaway here is that the models are getting better and better and better. The one in the bottom right is pretty darn good. and that's a system that is based on applications of artificial intelligence and machine learning based on this large-scale experimentation and testing. So the next step is to translate what we've been doing in that field into Clematis in a way that allows us to learn those signal patterns in context of Clematis so that we can apply this same kind of trajectory tracking behavior. I'm not going to drill into the right-hand graph except to say that the takeaway result on the right-hand graph is that the best performing model, 90% of the time, estimates pedestrian accuracy in under 2 meters. So the accuracy is better than 2 meters 90% of the time. It's better than 1 meter, actually it's under 1 meter better than 90% of the time. So that gives you a sense of the kind of accuracy we're achieving. So now I'm going to spend some time talking about highlights from the last year. So how have we taken this system that's being pioneered in the city of West Palm Beach, and how are we leveraging that to build on top of it? And so I'll tell you a story of heartbreak. So there's a program at the National Science Foundation. It's called the Engineering Research Centers Competition. It's the largest single investment that the National Science Foundation makes in engineering research. They make that investment every 3 years, and it is a $52 million investment. In the 2018 to 2019 competition, there were more than 225 applicants. I can't find the exact number. I think the number is 256. I lowballed it a little bit so that I wasn't making things up. In the first phase of that competition, which is based on a written proposal, those 225 applicants, the best engineering programs in the country, that's scaled down to 25 contenders. We made it to that round based on the work that's been done in the city of West Palm and in partnership with our colleagues in New York City. In the second stage of that competition, the remaining contenders were boiled down to 9. And again, that was based on a written proposal, and then it was based on a site visit. There was a site visit where we had 19 participants, including Chris and others from within the city, who flew to New York to support this process and to support the review that was done by the NSF. And ultimately, those 9 contenders were boiled down to 4, and we were not in that list. So we had a long conversation with the National Science Foundation about this. This is a long competition, and we wanted to understand what was the critical flaw, what separated the 4 from the remaining 5. And the answer was, there was no critical flaw. So we said, well, what do we do? And they said, this project that's being done is too important not to pursue. You have to come back and compete again. And so, if I'm remembering, Chris will probably remember better than I do, I think we had that call in, I want to say we had that call on September 4th of this year, and we put in our application on September 6th to go after this one more time. We'll know the result of where we fall in this competition by the end of this year. So right now we're at that 250 stage. We want to make it to the 25 that move forward. So we'll give this another go. Now it's not all bad news last year. So we have some successes that made it as well. So there's a paper that was recently published by Stepan and Fanchen. This is called Mobility, Intelligence, Sensing and Analytics Infrastructure for Urban Mobility Intelligence. This paper was published a couple of months back. Stepan presented it at the conference event. This paper was nominated for a Best Paper Award, so this represents the top 8% of all papers that were submitted to this conference. We're very excited about that. This was then invited to a special journal issue, so there's a special issue coming out specifically on smart cities. We'll have an extended version of this paper that will appear in that publication. That's due by December 31st, so we can't forget that. We have a second paper, Mobility Intelligence RSSI-based probe localization via machine learning. That's going to talk about the machine learning work that I've described. That's being led by Fanchen Bao in the back of the room. But I should have mentioned that this project is fundamental to the dissertations of both Stepan Mazocha and Fanchen Bao, who will graduate with their PhDs directly as a result of the work that they're doing in the city of West Palm Beach. The next thing I want to mention is that there was follow-on support through the Community Foundation for a project called Mobility Intelligence for Enhanced Pandemic Modeling. The idea is that agent-based models of COVID-19 and and other diseases which spread through close contact, these are all agent-based models are based on simulations of how people move. So the idea is to simulate, again, dots on a screen and how people move about space, and then to overlay characteristics of disease spread on how those dots move. Our thought here is that we can take existing models of how disease is spread, and we can introduce real mobility data, not synthetic, not fake stuff, but real data about how people are moving to customize disease projection studies into hyper-contextualized domains. So we have a streetscape level model of how a disease would spread in a city based on how people are moving today. And then, of course, when safeguards are introduced, how the disease might spread in the presence of those safeguards. So that's where that project is going. We have a project that's pending with the NSF in collaboration with the City of West Palm and in partnership with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. This is called CIVIC. NSF has a new program. This program is called CIVIC, and it's focused specifically on taking research results out of the laboratory and into the city. So the NSF wants to fund projects which can demonstrate tangible results within a 12-month time frame. It's a two-stage competition. The first stage is a $50,000 planning award that's used to plan the activities for the next 12 months, and then it's a $1 million investment directly into the city to invest in what has been proposed, which in this case is focused on using the mobility intelligence framework not only to support disease forecasting, but to support improved understanding of first mile, last mile challenges in bringing people to work. And so we're waiting to hear on the results of that. We'll hear about that this year. We received a new award from the National Science Foundation called an REU. This is Research Experiences for Undergraduates in Sensing and Smart Systems. We bring 10 talented undergraduate students to FAU each summer for the next 3 years. Those students receive a $5,500 stipend. Their meals are covered. Their housing is covered. We cover their transportation. And they work with a dedicated research mentor for 10 weeks. This is actually a renewed award. We reapplied. We have done this 3 times before. The last time we ran this program, I believe we had 184 applications. We could only accept 10 applicants. We're very happy to run this program again. Two of the students that are funded through this project will focus specifically on activities within the city of West Palm Beach. Finally, I'll mention a new project that's just tangentially related. We have a new award that will come in on July 1 of 2021, 2 new awards through SACURA that are focused specifically on ocean observation. So we'll leverage the networking infrastructure that's been installed in the city of West Palm to measure sea level along the coast, and that will span all the way from South Florida up into North Carolina. And we're also working right now to finalize something called a smart reef. That smart reef is being deployed now in South Carolina, and we've been contacted to see whether we would deploy something mirrored in West Palm Beach, specifically focused on underwater observation and monitoring. This is, for us, an incredibly exciting program that has already paid significant rewards for FAU, for our students, for our faculty. We're incredibly grateful to the City of West Palm Beach for letting us use this city laboratory that's so fantastic to have in close proximity to campus. We sincerely appreciate the support from the city, from the Knight Foundation, from the Community Foundation. And with that, I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Based upon the data you've received thus far, and I know when you first came to us, we thought there might be some possibilities for monetizing trends and being able to look at what's going on in the retail sector. So are you still as optimistic about the applications, I guess, of the data that we're getting?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. So one of the things I didn't talk about in the presentation today is that once we have these trajectories in place, the next step is to take those trajectories and to overlay that with the GIS data that the city has already invested in. So it's a fairly short step from taking that trajectory data, overlaying it with GIS data, and turning that into something that is useful to businesses in the area. Okay. And then, of course, we have to figure out how does the city monetize that in a way that supports the whole but provides differentiated value to paying customers.
Very good. Any other questions, commissioners, comments? This is exciting stuff. I mean, obviously, data and reliance upon data for decision-making is the wave of the future. Notwithstanding, perhaps, no, I'm not going to go there. So that's good, and I'm glad that West Palm Beach appears to be on the cutting edge of not only collecting it, but being able in a position to use it to help us be smarter about the decisions we make. So thank you,
Thank you.
and good luck on the additional rounds of the competition.
Thanks so much.
I don't want to see a heartbreak emoji next year.
Yeah, we don't want to see it either.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
And thanks for your interest in our city.
Of course.
Okay. Chris, anything else on this item?
No, that's all, Mayor. The only thing I will add is that we are thinking in the future. Paul Jones in our IT department has been also down to see the laboratory, and because the idea is that eventually this will live in our IT department because it will be a robust infrastructure. So
Fantastic.
thanks so much, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, item 2, bicycle master plan presentation. I know Commissioner Schoaf and Lambert, you wanted this. I also wanted this, and let me kind of set the tone. I think it's important, commissioners, that we get a level set on what's going on with our bicycle master plan, the implementation strategy, et cetera, because I want to avoid, to the extent possible, that as we begin rolling out phases of the master plan, that we will, and inevitably we will encounter blowback. But I also want us to be able to keep each project in perspective, and also want to make sure there is a commitment to the plan as a whole. And we need to have that conversation. We need to have that discussion. So I want the instructed staff to put together a presentation on the master plan as a whole, to come and let's discuss it and make sure there's still buy-in as a commission, so that we will have that level set as we begin to implement particular projects. Commissioners, Madam President, Commissioner Lambert, did you want to add anything as to why you felt this was an appropriate conversation at this time? Madam President, Commissioner Lambert?
Mayor, I appreciate you saying a level set. I think that the thing I think of when asking for this to come forward was that we help build consensus amongst our community and our neighborhoods. And I think we all want to move forward, and we want to do what's right for the city. But I think that we need to make sure we communicate well and manage expectations along the way. So thank you for this presentation.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. And when I did receive some unfortunate news, I understand you will be leaving us next month. So I wanted to publicly thank you for all of your contributions over the years to the city, and wish you nothing but the best going forward. And I also wanted to observe that you've got the Camilla Harris footwear on. You got your Chuck Taylors, I noticed, right?
Yeah, I wanted to impress you guys with my outfit today also.
Well, I was wanting to impress you with my knowledge of that Chuck Taylors were the cool thing, according to my wife. She educated me on that. But in all seriousness, we do appreciate everything you've done for the city, and wish you nothing but the best going forward.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay, or is it a little muzzled? Yes, no?
It's muzzled,
No problem. Better?
much better.
Thank you so much for having me here today. The mayor and senior staff has asked me to put together a presentation. I'll be really recapping the purpose and need of the bicycle master plan as it is our transportation plan for the city, and then ultimately walk through the steps that the city and staff went through back in 2017 to adopt this comprehensive plan. So ultimately, when we look at the reason why do we have to have a bicycle master plan, and really to really develop long-range objectives that's not only consistent with our safety goals, but providing wider choices for all user of ages and ability. So we're really talking about equity and how we connect equitable modes of transportation into our job placements and our core downtown facility. The other very, very important thing that we have to consider is we do have a comprehensive plan that we have to be consistent with, and this is directly out of our comprehensive plans. There's more sections to this, but I only summarize a few policy, and more specifically, policy 2.4.4a, the city shall adopt a pedestrian and bicycle master plan to complete the major system. So this is also very important for us to stay consistent with our plan. Prior to 2017, and there was no transportation plan, there was no bicycle master plan. So if you guys can remember, back then there were a lot of major efforts for us to be consistent with our mobility and improving our infrastructures. So there are quite a bit of benefits to having a bicycle facilities in general. Transportation plan in our city, there's a lot of economics benefits that tie into having a bike network itself. Not only that, you don't have to look too far away, but this is an example from Central Florida. They have, primarily focused on building a trail network that has pumped over $42 million into the economy itself. I myself has personally utilized some of those facilities and seen some of the connections that as a result of this. In addition to that, there's been a lot of increase in property value because of having bicycle network. And if we looked at values of homes, and just in comparison of what we've done in the past, this past couple years, and then if we give it enough time, let's say 3 years from now, look at a 5-year result, you can see that the majority of property value will increase based on our improvements in investment into those infrastructure itself. And then, of course, it's the health benefits. As you know, right now, the health industry, it's very focused on the COVID-19 and the pandemic. But if you look back in 2017, 2018, what's really killing Americans are heart diseases. And that's really, and you see that more in the lower income neighborhoods than you do in more affluent neighborhoods. So it's very important for us to provide facilities, especially in those areas in need. And so you're probably thinking, oh, well, it's COVID, and so we've been hunkered down since March of this year. And although we missed the interaction of humans and other human beings, what we've seen is that there has been an increase in bike sales nationally. Locally, we've seen it. Bike sales nationally, there's been an increase of over 3 times as much. So this is really important. If you look back into 20 years ago or even 50 years ago, people tend to walk and bike before they drive autonomous vehicles or electric vehicles. And I know we're moving into the future, but we also have to think of our back to basic. And then more importantly, it's the safety benefits that having connected facilities bring to the city. And we look at just how other cities and these other data have been such a success story. We know that within the city of West Palm Beach, that the highest crashes, those highest networks crashes, does not have bike facilities itself. So there are safety benefits, and it is consistent with our Vision Zero policy itself. Okay, and then lastly, I think what's we really need to understand is, especially east of I-95 in the city of West Palm Beach, we're a gridded network. We're out of space. So the idea of increasing capacity, what we think of how to move people in a certain amount of space, is very limited. So we have to find very creative ways on how we can transport people and goods in less space than what we have. And that's really looking at transit priority and also multimodal improvements such as bike ped improvements. So we, just to recap, this is what we started in 2017. You can see a picture of Chris Rook right there biking through our downtown. We got together with a team of stakeholders and our staff, and we really inventory the entire city. These are, not only staff, but professionals and really our stakeholders biking every back end road and to determine what is the feasibility of that network. And then after we collected some baseline data, we did put together a public engagement strategy, which we hosted 3 charrettes that I can go into more detail in a little bit. We developed a website. We had TV interviews. Even the Palm Beach Post had written articles about our bike network. And so with all of this effort, we did work together with the mobility study and the Okeechobee Corridor study. And I don't know if many of you commissioners were here during that time, but that was the largest public engagement that we've had in the city up to this date. We had over 700 people that attended over a 3-day event. So that's very good engagement for us.
Hold on when we have a question. Commissioner Lambert?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't know if I'm right under the air, but it is hard to hear you. If you don't mind just speaking up a little bit more.
I will get closer.
So sorry. Thank you. I want to make sure I hear it all.
Okay, of course. In addition to our public engagement strategy that we work with the Downtown Mobility Study and the Okeechobee Corridor Study, we also held 3 public meetings, which are listed here. And each meeting, for example, we held at the Manatee Center. It is not only target for the northern section of the city, it is intended to capture anybody who can't participate in one or the other. And during this meeting, we had, it was really called Arts and Craft, in my opinion. It was a lot of fun, where we have maps of the entire city, and we asked residents, and just as an example right here, to draw on there, where would I like to ride? Regardless if you live in the north end of the city, you have the opportunity to draw your routes on the south end and also to the western communities. The other thing that we did is we have a visual preference survey, because not a lot of people understand the technical jargon of an engineer. So we provided samples of facilities, and we asked them to rank from 1 to 5. What would you rather like to see? And we did that both with the mobility study as well. And ultimately, we had a stack of surveys that we compiled in the results. And it really tells us, like, what can we do as far as how do we build out our network? What type of facilities are these, from a feasibility standpoint and a technical feasibility standpoint, we can provide? And then which one, there is a hierarchy to these facilities, as in what is the one facility that people would like to see at all time if we have space for it, and then where are some other challenges that we may lie. So with that, we propose over 100 miles of network. So as you can see, the existing network is very lacking of what we have, but the future network is really exciting for us because it's providing over 100 miles of access that we're providing. In addition to providing just the network, we also look at the cost benefits of providing these facilities. For example, how do we rank one over the other? And that's really important, because if we have all the funding in the world, we love to build them all at the same time. But we do have to look at the ranking and the criteria for ranking. For example, we looked at population density. How many people are we serving? And then if they have car ownership or not. This is land use data that we take into consider, and really it's the equity data that we take into consideration. And again, we normalize the score, and ultimately we identified 147 projects citywide. And we broke them down to 5 tiers. The reason for 5 tiers, because that's, there's really, we looked at, can we build it within our capital plan within that first 5 years. And that's the intention of it. And then, of course, this is this data is put in a map, and we do have this geodata layer available that looked, we color-coded, so it's easier to see. But for example, some of the Tier 1 projects that we accomplished already, Olive Avenue, which is in your district, Commissioner Lambert, from Gregory all the way up to Southern Boulevard. We constructed it within the 6 months, because it was an easy build type of project. And what we found is, so far, by adding just bike facilities, just a stripe on the ground, that you see a reduction of travel speed. So it further validates why we're doing this type of project and how we have data to support its usefulness. And then, of course, a lot of residents have always asked us, can we move it up with priorities? Absolutely. We have moved projects up in its priority, and primarily we try to work with the resurfacing project, how we can work together with those type of projects. But more importantly is working together with the utilities project. Washington is a very large-scale project. We have dedicated some of our gas tax and some of our bike funding into making it a better product than it is already. And then, of course, safety, right? We created a new criteria as a result of this bicycle master plan, and we created new criteria as a result of the Vision Zero policy that we have, and that's safety. So are there short intervention that we can do, such as enhancing or just creating safer places for people to walk and bike, and that becomes its own criteria itself. And so to really summarize, because 2020 is a very odd year for us, but since we adopted and accepted this plan up to, let's say, the end of 2019, we have accomplished quite a bit, quite many projects. 10 miles of bike facilities, which is great. In addition to that, that's a lot to be very proud of. We paved over 16.5 miles of road because of this project and working together with other projects. And then really what's leveraging, because we've got to think about how do we make our budget works, and that's the most difficult thing for us. As far as coming out of a pandemic, we know that infrastructure bills are coming out, so we're very reliant on grant dollars. And how do we leverage these grant dollars to make our project whole? So we were awarded, up to this date, over $34 million of grants. And these grants not only pay for bike facilities, I want to emphasize that these grants pays for drainage infrastructure, it pays for lighting, it pays for a lot of trees and streetscape elements that we would not necessarily get with our gas tax itself. So it's not only, even though this is a master plan that provide connectivity, it yields much greater results. The other thing that I did not highlight in this presentation is that because we have a master plan, we were able to work with developers when they come in to propose a project, to see how we can improve multimodal safety along their project as well. So that's very exciting. And then lastly, we won awards. I just want to put it out there, a little bragging, a little bit of a bragging rights, because we have worked very hard to bring new facilities, such as this project, Spruce Avenue. This is the first ever advisory bike lane that we had in all of South Florida. So I'm very proud to say that in streets like this, especially what we have redefined what a neighborhood network looks like, it yields quite a bit of benefits. And we even rode the street with our fire department to see how it would function. So as a result of this, there is a change in national standards that's coming up in January. So I just want to highlight that the work that we've done over the past really 5 years has really set the tone of what could be the future for the city of West Palm Beach. And this concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. Wynn, can you talk a little bit about the equity aspect of having a comprehensive bike master plan and Could you address that, please?
Absolutely. And I think from equity, we think of, there should be two layers that we think of. It's lateral and it's vertical, right? Vertical as in what kind of income do you have? And lateral is how do we get people to and from their point of interest. So when we think of, for example, putting in a bike lane in a low-income neighborhood, that's a no-brainer. But it's actually very difficult for us to install the connection that's needed to get to jobs, right? So a lot of time what you see is there's segments in the network that's very challenging for us to construct. And those are major intersections. You know, that's one of the big acknowledged. Crossing a state route or a county road is very difficult, but something that we can control as a city is really providing that connection through an existing neighborhood. And so when and sometimes I understand that is difficult because there's a lot of neighbors that says, hey, not in my neighborhood, not in front of my property. But what that does is that prohibits quite a large number of people being able to access their place of interest. I'll give you this example right here, Spruce Avenue, advisory bike lane. After the project was constructed, we did receive a handful of complaints from residents that says, I'm losing parking. Okay, I'm losing parking, it's very challenging. And that's the balance. But out of a handful of residents, we provided access to anybody who need to use a bike to get to and from work into downtown Northwood. So from an equity standpoint, because there's a balance that we provide access to those low-income neighbors. Because if you think about it, in particular, Spruce is a much better, more comfortable ride for someone to ride to and from work than it is on Broadway as it is right now.
Good. Thank you. Questions? Okay, Madam President and Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you, and thank you, Wen, for the presentation, and Mayor for bringing this forward. Probably my request for this to be on a work session is primarily because of Spruce. There was an immense amount of engagement prior to with different stakeholders in the neighborhood, and then after implementation, the road looks beautiful, as you can see. But there were a couple of challenges which I think are learning opportunities for us as we look at this bigger network. As you had mentioned, the context of the street in this particular neighborhood, throughout history, there's been conversions of garages. We now have Airbnbs, and so it does create this parking challenge. I think one of the things that would be helpful in the implementation of this is signage. The no parking signage is really important if we are not allowing parking, but also in the interim, if there are available flexible options. So definitely, I think neighbors are in favor of making sure that we're having some equitable access so that we provide biking paths, et cetera. Some of the challenges that neighbors have expressed as well, though, is that because cars aren't parked on the side of the road, speed has increased down the road because there is more roadway available. So to whatever extent we can help mitigate that, I think is really important. But I guess I'm just wondering, in our implementation of this, because you have to do it in segments, and I totally understand that infrastructure costs money, as we're implementing these sections of roadway and kind of communicating to neighbors about what is the larger plan, because you'll hear from a lot of neighbors now, this is the only street with bike lanes, when really LA Kirksey, just down the way, has bike lanes too, which within the context of that street functions a lot differently than this street. So are there those opportunities, specifically looking at ADA? We have a number of neighbors along this street that had access to their home a lot closer and now have some challenges. So how do we look at those implementation challenges as things go forward and we're looking at our residents changing modes of transportation, going down to one-car households, et cetera, which will naturally thin the process. So can we look at some of those implementations of maybe some flexible rollouts where we have the hardscape there, but still allow parking until such a time that we have more of a roadway built up? Can we increase our signage? Look at maybe during a project such as this, saying to neighbors, hey, we're redoing a section of the sidewalk. The city could do a curb cut for you if you want to implement your driveway where there once was a driveway. So any considerations like that we've kind of looked at or had some learnings on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think signage, yeah, I want to address your comments in parts. Absolutely, signage is something that is very feasible for us to look and observe the way it's functioned to see how we can increase it. The other thing that we have received from some neighbors also is that if there's a sign pollution, they don't want too many signs. So I actually looked into, I see you nodding, I also looked into a painted curb program, very similar to SFMTA. It really makes it much easier to understand where you can and cannot park. So we can definitely take a look into something like that to implement. As for ADA access, absolutely, this project, and you have to understand our facilities, especially if we want to talk about this particular project and many part of the cities, our facilities, it's a responsibility to always upgrade our facilities to be ADA accessible. Given said that, you have to look at our sidewalks, and we did a large number of sidewalks. Every time we do projects now, it has to be free of tripping hazards, and we have to have detectable warning surface to a resident. Now, if a resident would like to park right in front of their house where they already have a driveway, and we can also work with them to see how we can improve their driveway itself. So there are certain things that we can do better. Obviously, every time we do a project, there's always a lessons learned. But ultimately, as we're observing this project, when it's done and post-COVID, we're really going to see how it's being functioned more differently, because right now there's a lot of people who are staying from home, and so there is more of a need for parking. But really, this phase of our this year, it's going to come to an end where we're going to see behavior change. And one behavior that we need to acknowledge that has changed is that more people are biking and walking now than they have ever been before. So absolutely, we can look into those other details to see how we can improve, especially this particular project or all projects that we looked at.
I appreciate that, and I just want to state for the record, the project is beautiful. Neighbors are happy about how the street looks, and I just think it presents an opportunity for us to look at some of those things that we can be, kind of rolling out our implementation as we get our entire network built.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So one last thing I want to say, just because of this project was constructed, we have a different neighborhood that asked us to implement something very similar to this, and Roosevelt Estates out of all of the neighborhoods. So we're very happy with the product.
Thank you. Commissioner Lambert?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Mayor, I do have a number of questions, so I'll just start with the first one. Can you describe when the process for determining which style of bike facility goes in? Because I heard you talk about South Olive and how the green striping has slowed down people driving on South Olive, and I had a house on South Olive. I can attest to that. It was really great to see that. But then I heard Commissioner Shove talk about this here, and we didn't do the green striping. And so I think that is some confusion that some residents have, is why are we doing it one way on one street and another way on another?
Absolutely. I think short answer is land use. You have to look at the context, right? In this image right here to the right, you have a network. Basically, it's point of connection. Where do we get from one to the other? The other thing that we did when we were working on the plan is there are certain sections that's very important, because these are our collector roads that collects all the traffic in the neighborhood and take it to a point of destination. We have proposed the actual typical section for that segment. When it gets into something that staff has a lot of flexibility on, is really what we define as a neighborhood network, right? So before we decide on what is a neighborhood network, it could be a Cheryl on the street, it could be a series of speed bumps, it could be a series of traffic calming devices, which are also speed bumps. But ultimately, when we did this planning, it's not meant to do 90% engineering design. It is a planning document. So staff, as far as technical staff, we have to, when we looked at feasibility, we looked at traffic count before we do anything. We looked at speed, obviously. And then lastly, it's space, because from a lot of the projects that we have becomes a geometry challenge for us, right? It really is, because anytime you move a curb, it costs millions and millions of dollars. We're all very constricted on how much funding we have for each project. So that's how we were able to make a space. I'll give you an example of South Olive. That project is actually, we designed it in-house, staff designed it in-house, and I was the engineer of record. So we saved quite a bit of funding for that. But what we also saw is that the travel lane there was also 14 and a half, 15 feet. So it doesn't make sense for us to put a symbol or a sharrow in the ground. We looked at feasibility. Okay, what if we do a bike lane? So we looked at the hierarchy that was voted by the residents, what would I prefer most? Of course, everybody would love to have an off-site trail. That's really the number one. And then two is really protection. And if you can't get protection because we have standards that we have to meet, then I'll move down. Can it be a striped dedicated bike facility before I can go down to the lowest, which is just a sharrow on the road? So our goal is always to provide one above than what the recommendation is. So, and that's why a lot of it is different, is changed. The other factor that we take into consideration outside of speed and volume data is really parking count. So, for example, if you have a mile of roadway that, and believe me when you say that we count nights, weekend, and even sometimes during 6 o'clock in the morning and keep a whole spreadsheet on it. We do. We look at what does the utilization look like. So if you have a mile of parking and the most that you have is 9 cars, there's feasibility there. And we have to make the really difficult decision on if we provide safety for people that's riding their bike, or if we provide parking spaces, or how do we provide mitigation for that. So those are the decision process that goes into some of these projects. And so that's why when it comes down to that, the feasibility of the project change, but we always come back and report back to the mayor and the commissioner to see what we can do.
You said you had some other
I
questions?
do, thank you. Thank you for that. And related to that, I know that we have done counts ahead of time, or we know, who's biking, or if a community or that street has a lot of cyclists. But I've heard you say in previous presentations, almost that if you build it, they will come kind of scenario. Correct me if I'm wrong, but have we done a comparison from before a bike facility went in to after to see the increased use?
Right. We do not have before count. Really is staff restriction. I don't want to give excuses for us not to have, but what we do have collected is speed data, because at this time, and I understand that you have to count bike, and that's something that the city will have to continue on a trend to count bikes. But what's more important right now, and what residents can understand, is that bike facilities lower travel speed. So that means it's, everybody can understand, it's like, oh, they're speeding on my street. They really can't identify, oh, there's 20 people that bike in the morning to work. So when we count speed data, because we felt that it's something that the community can identify with.
Okay, and is there a standard operating procedure, and I don't know if this is for the engineering department or communications or community outreach, is there a standard operating procedure for how we're letting the communities know that they're getting these bike facilities? Obviously, this presentation will be aired. I know a number of us are sharing it with others, but what are the next steps?
I would say the next steps for really this is we need to continue what's in our program right now. Outside of the 5 tiers of projects, we do have funding that is dedicated in the penny sales tax for certain type of projects that we need to commit to. When a project gets to, to a point where there's significant funding involved, I would say more than $2 million, we typically created a project website that's available on the engineering website that gives details of what's next steps are. So ultimately, right now, we have over 5 projects in the next 2 to 3 years that are bike-related. And I think that some of them are really simple, but some of them are very challenging. So I do believe that our staff has been engaging the community. Sometimes the level of engagement that we provided when we meet with them for more than 7 times, it becomes more challenging for staff to actually function. So when it comes down to it, it's our professional opinion of here's all the data we collected, here's what we heard, and then it's really up to the commissioner, the mayor and the commissioners to really vote on it. And I think that will give us the level of support that we need to continue. And again, we have to, I don't want to say that we don't support biking, because I believe that we all support safety here, but I do think that the ability for the city to continue to obtain federal grants relies on the level of support that we get from our bike master plan.
Final question, Mayor.
Yes.
And I'm glad you brought that up, the other funding, grants, and also you mentioned in your presentation being creative about other projects that are going on that we were able to pave on this slide here over 16 miles of roads that we otherwise wouldn't have had the money out of our gas tax program to pave. And so that brings me to South Flagler, and I know that the residents who live along there and those of us who traverse South Flagler would very much like to see it repaved, and that part of the way we were able to start that discussion is by looking at the bicycle lanes that are on that stretch there. So I don't know if you have any update for us on progress, or if we're able to start talking about how we might be able to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. South Flagler has always been more a feasibility project for us. There are quite a bit, anything on Flagler itself, there is a lot of opportunities. There's this grant called the Sun Trail Grant that comes out every year, and it's specifically for trail. So if you look at our bike master plan and what was intended for Flagler, because I don't know if you remember, Commissioner Lambert, before a few years ago when we talked about South Flagler, people were saying nobody's going to bike there anyway, they'll just bike on the sidewalk. What we heard during COVID is there's too many people biking on the sidewalk, get them off the sidewalk. So what can we do? The bottom line is we're kind of tied on what we can do until we make the decision together as a community and as the mayor and commission give us direction. There's grants like that because it's on the East Coast Greenway. It's on a lot of these other plans that gives us a lot of leverage. There's also a different grant called Safe Routes to School, and Safe Routes to School is a little more flexible. It could be bike lanes, it could be lighting, it could be sidewalks connection. So there's quite a bit. And what we typically do for a project that challenging is that we have to look at the feasibility, because when I think of feasibility, I think of how much is it going to cost, because we still have to function, right? It's not just the capital cost, but staff time to administer a grant project. So how much is that going to cost? And then we most likely will be able to leverage different type of grant to make the project whole with a little bit of city match funding.
Okay.
Yes, Mayor, just a comment that as we look at these projects, I am sure a number of us have heard from the residents that they'd very much like to start having conversations about South Flagler and working together to be able to move forward on that project.
Thank you. And I think the separate conversation we need to have about South Flagler is the result of the study that we've done, the paving study, and where that ranks in the priority, and and that's a whole nother presentation. But what got South Flag, I guess, elevated above other streets, which have even more dire paving requirements, is the access to funding for the bike lanes, and that's where we ran into a little bit of a hiccup. But we can continue to have that conversation. Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I know you mentioned, for example, that some of the priorities might change if there were other utility projects going on in a neighborhood, and you mentioned Washington, for example. And I was curious, I've heard from some of the neighbors in the Washington area that they're excited about having bike lanes, but they don't feel like there's very much lighting around that area. So I wondered if, when you are moving forward with the biking areas, will there also be sort of lighting that is prioritized in these same areas, just to make sure that everything is as safe as it can be?
Yeah, and I think for that particular project, no. Short answer, but I do think that lighting is a safety element that goes hand in hand with the bike network itself. We typically like to look at crash data to determine where and when are the crashes are happening. And citywide, we have Vision Zero data that suggests that crashes are happening in the afternoon. That's where it's most unsafest in the city. So that's something that could be considered. It is not a gas tax or a bike funding option for us. It really becomes very complicated. But again, like I would suggest that there are other funding available out there, like Safe Routes to School or just safety funding available that we can go after to make a lot of these projects whole. When we do a lighting project, it's actually simpler if we do it separately because we don't have the cost of the underground infrastructure. We directional drill, which they have a big machine that drills underneath everything, and that's typically how we build these projects. But again, I don't have information on the lighting funding that's available or how we can make that happen. But I'm sure it's a very important element. So you can please relay that message to the residents. It's a very important element as well.
Follow up?
Thank you. I just have two comments. One is that I want to thank you so much for the city as a whole for taking so much time to think about the biking and the equity of it. This summer, when I was working very closely with residents on many food distribution events, we received so many calls asking, if they could walk up or bike up to receive food because they did not have a car to drive there. And, I am just so proud that we are working on this, and thank you. And when I just want to say to you personally, many years before I was a commissioner, I worked with you as a PR person on your road safety initiatives and Vision Zero, and I just want to thank you so much. Our city has benefited so much from your innovation and your passion, and I couldn't even call you when I heard the news because I'm so heartbroken, but you have set us up for such, so many positive things that we will for many years be thanking you. So I am just happy to know you and wishing you such good luck in the future.
Thank you. I still have more presentations to make, so it's not the last time I'll see you guys.
Okay, well, this is the last time we're going to say all those nice words about it.
Okay.
I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding. Anything else on this item, commissioners? Okay, and I think commissioners, and we're not obviously taking any action, but the decision we have to make is whether we as a commission still support this master bike plan. And if we do, then certainly some tweaking to community engagement and signage and that type of thing. But the question is whether we are still in support of this master bike plan for a variety of reasons as a whole. And so as we are looking at implementation in different neighborhoods of different sections, that's got to be our North Star. Either we want this or we don't, because it's not the type of thing where you can halfway do it. You can't say you have a master plan and then when it comes to the implementation in a certain portion of the city that's part of the master plan, you say, no, we're not going to move ahead with that project because the plan is a whole. Anyway, so as we consider projects, let's keep that in mind. All right, Next item, Smart Loading Zone Pilot Program. Mr. Valbrecht?
It's going to be me presenting
Oh, it's you.
again.
Okay, thank you. All right.
I have some reference materials because this is actually a very exciting project. I'm bringing to you the Smart Loading Zone Pilot Program. We executed an agreement a few months ago, and here are the details of the program itself.
Okay.
I do like to acknowledge that the project team is not only the City of West Palm Beach staff, but we have CORD, who unfortunately can't be here today because of travel restriction, but we have related in the audience to answer questions if needed. So as you know, especially during the pandemic, there has been a lot of Amazon deliveries. They've become your best friends that comes to your house almost every other day to deliver everything that we need. But ultimately what that caused is a lot of chaos in the way that we manage our streets. And so we came to the city a few months ago, really just to talk about how do we modernize our communication strategy, shifting from this very beautiful design parking signs to technology, an app. And so with that, in Resolution 133-22, we came with to the City Commission and to the Mayor for a Smart Loading Zone Pilot Program to not only increase efficiency, but enhance safety with double parking on our city streets. It is a one-year agreement with CORD, and we targeted the location at Rosemary Square. And so today I'm really going to go over what we've done up to that, up to this point, because from my last presentation, there is a commitment to come back and to really update the program and then talk about how do we set our fee structure as we're moving along. So we've been working on the program design for the past 2 to 3 months. This is one of those projects that moves very, very quick and it's very dynamic and it's exciting. The Related also has provided us with a CCD board approval just recently in November. And then here, we're really just following the schedule that's being laid out, and we're going to come to you with more information and the fee resolution. So what is the program? Where are we having this itself? We know that's an app, so I'm going to go into a little further detail on what the app is and where the locations are. So we have Valerio in our audience that has been working diligently to collect information and do really mapping out our city streets using the technology that CORD itself has provided for us. And with that, we've specifically targeted Rosemary Square, as we know that the holidays is approaching, and we know that there's going to be a lot of drop-off and pickups in this area. So this is a technology aspect. There's really 3 interfaces that I like to talk about. The first is the data collection app. This is something that is on the back end for our staff and for CORD to collect information from where's the curb line to is there a new sign or a new bench that's out there. It becomes a really challenging project for us because it's a curbless street, so it's not a traditional type of street. But we were able to use the collector app to import information. The other app that they have is the CORD Driver app itself. It is not only a reservation program or reservation apps for, and we're targeting UPS, FedEx, Amazon drivers here, is really for them to reserve a spot before they come. So there's always confidence that there is loading zone available. And then lastly, there is a CORD Inspector app. So our inspection has traditionally been somebody traversing and walking the streets to see if somebody is there and the meter is expired. With the CORD Inspector app, it actually is a back end that you can download on the existing cell phone that our parking enforcement officers has. And then it really tells you if somebody's there or somebody overstays, so it pings the inspectors to go and enforce. And then, of course, one of the things that we've been doing as we're designing the program is testing the battery life, because this is an app that's running to the back end. We are running into some issues with the existing handheld because there's different, I don't know if you remember seeing there's a handheld and there's a few buttons and it prints the tickets. This app running in the back is ultimately draining the battery life. So we are looking to maybe an external battery pack that we could co-locate with this. We are going to talk about sensors in a little bit because, as you see earlier with the iSense project, we are also using sensor technology here. And then and I think the most important aspect of it is the management tool that comes with it is real-time data in a dashboard very similar to this that tells you what is the utilization of each street and how much funding are we potentially or we're collecting on each segment. So it becomes, from a checks and balance and from a finance perspective, it gives us really easy, details for us to manage our books at the end of the year and ultimately look into our budgeting for the next fiscal year. And then what we're looking at is, and we'll talk about in a little bit about peak hour usage, as everything like cars and delivery, there's peak hours and low hours during the day. So we definitely want to have the ability to increase and decrease as it's going to turn over demand. So here is a few image of the sensor, a little bit different from what you've seen before. It is as small as a small pancake, and it's very easy to install. There's going to be some brackets on the existing poles, but ultimately it's a puck on the ground. That's the sensor itself. And so we're a very good candidate for this type of sensors because in other pilot cities that CORD is conducting with, they have snow. And so because we're in good weather, outside a little rain here and there, this is a very good candidate for us. Within the package that I left you has really a lot of details on specification. The sensor itself is because CORD is backed by Alphabet Mobility Lab. This is the same technology out of Sidewalk Labs, excuse me. So I'm just going to walk through step by step on how a driver and a user would be using this. We have videos of this already that's going to be out on our website. But ultimately, a driver would pull up into a loading zone. They're going to see a QR code or and if you guys have not used a QR code, I've been using a lot of it now during the pandemic. You can scan it and it gets you to the app for you to download. And you enter in your information as you sign up. And it really tells you what type of vehicle and all the available real-time available spaces in that area. You can reserve it ahead of time, right? So that you don't have to really find for a parking spot right when you get there. And then it alerts the enforcement officers that there are reservations in the area as well. If everybody I'd like to do an exercise with you. You have your cell phone out. Please text to 855-545-0602. And this app will pop up. And this number is live for West Palm Beach right now. What's
that number again?
The 855-545-0602. And this will have, the booking app will come up. 0602. Yep. And this parking app will come up and it gives you your reservation for you to download and for you to have an account, just like an Uber app or anything like that. The other thing that they also have is very similar to other reservation apps is that if you feel that you're delivering, maybe there's a building that is stuck or you can't get through quickly, you can always extend it so that you would not risk having a ticket. So I know everybody's so excited for us to have this new technology. But ultimately, this is the program fees that I am proposing. This is probably the most important thing that I want to share with you today, is that we work with Related on the operating hours. Because when are these zones going to be operated? It is proposed at 7 a.m. to midnight. It's very consistent with the existing enforcement hours that's out there right now, and throughout the holidays and weekends. What we're proposing is that the fees itself is $1 every 15 minutes and $2 every 30 minutes, as you can see being proposed right here. What we have a cap on what it could be, and ultimately what that does, it gives staffs the flexibility to adjust when it is at peak hour during capacity. When we hit 75% of utilization, we want to increase it so that we can have turnover on the available spaces that's there. The other thing that we have is really the expired meter. So we're talking about enforcement itself. So right now, within our ordinance, if a meter is expired or non-pavement, it's $27. And if you're parked in a moving lane, it's $42. This is very low, and I'll be very frank with you as far as our fees in our especially our busiest area in downtown. But what that does is that people tends to not park in a parking space. They double park in the middle of the street, and it becomes a dangerous situation for us. We are proposing, as part of this pilot and part of this fees resolution, to increase it to 50 and 86. These fees are designed so that the program would actually pay for itself. So if you have enforcement officers that's out there that is not only ticketing, if they don't ticket, then the reservation rates will pay for their time. So this is a revenue neutral, if not revenue positive structure. So what are we doing with communications? And I'm sure everybody would like to be interested. We did set up a website. It is not live yet. It is something that we are setting up. So once the program is, prior to its launch, we're going to turn that live. In the package you have, it's also different flyers and in English and Spanish, and also a letter that's targeting the drivers themselves and the drivers, the company. We are working with TV18 as part of a promotional clip that we're going to issue. And of course, Kathleen and the communications department is really helping us with social media and press releases as we go. The other thing that we have received a lot of support on is from Related, that designed these flyers. And I thank them graciously for following our standards for color, and we do have standards for color and logo. But ultimately, this is all draft information right here, but this is a good sample of what you see. There is a email that is available 24/7 that goes directly to CORD. It's already set up, WPB Smart Zones at CORD.com. And this information, if you have any questions at all, there'll be somebody to respond to it. So really, this concludes my presentation, but I'd like to talk about next steps. The next step is that before we implement any fees, we have to take it to the City Commission for approval. And then with that, that's really important for us to set the rates itself. As you can see, this is a snippet from the dashboard. It's dashboard itself from CORD, and it's already ready to go with minor adjustments, obviously. And then there is going to be a communications plan where CORD is going to hire kind of a street team to go out there to engage before the launch and after the launch itself. Our tentative date is January 19th. Public Works is really assisting us with signage, and we're working on sensor installation and all of the details that goes into launching this program.
Very good. Madam President?
Thank you, and thank you for this presentation. When I just wanted to clarify so that I can kind of wrap my mind around this program. So the main target audience for this program would be delivery truck drivers, correct? So that Uber or Lyft drivers, and then probably secondarily parents dropping off kids or whatever might be the case there. So this would represent a distinct difference from the way now Amazon pulls over, jumps out, jumps back in, and kind of operates their vehicle. So I understand the logistics of enforcement, of saying there will be sensors that say there's a vehicle parked there, but the practice of enforcement is kind of something that I'm curious about, and how that might affect business. And I know Related is a partner in this, but if now FedEx or UPS or Amazon, whomever, has to pay for parking, how does that affect the delivery to our businesses?
Absolutely. So very specifically, we target, like you said, Amazon, FedEx, because they do take a long time, dwell time on our streets itself. If you're taking an Uber, it takes literally less than a minute for us to get in and get out once our Uber or Lyft picks us up, right? But we specifically target a lot of these deliveries because the dwell time takes a long time, and there's been a lot of double parking on our streets. I don't know if you, even if we don't go down Rosemary Square, as you exit the Commissioner Chamber and you go down Clematis, there's always a moving van or delivery trucks that is double parking. And that's the intention, is for us to mitigate the safety of it. Realistically, loading zones throughout the country has always been free, right? It's always been free to operate on our street, but it causes a lot of issues as far as like safety. There's been a shift, and really like 2019 has been a big shift on curb management itself, and not only manage like how it's used, but how it's used in an efficient way. For example, the curb could be flexible, and that's what we define these curb as. It could be for bike share, car share, it could be for loading and unloading. We don't have enough data to determine what that looks like yet, but this is the first introduction for us to really manage that. The other thing that because we're targeting Amazon and FedEx and UPS, how they do business and how they deliver is already in the fees that they charge the customer. And in other cities, like larger cities, and I'll tell you what they typically do, they take all the parking tickets for their double and triple parking, and at the end of the day, they go and they negotiate a cost to buy out costs at the end of the year. So that's not necessarily the right type of business that we want to invite in our city. And we're not saying that everywhere is going to be affected. We're only talking about the most, I would say, pedestrian zones in this area, or the most congested area that we have in the city.
So would that mean we anticipate that as this represents a shift nationally, that sooner or later our FedEx and Amazons are going to absorb that into their cost that they charge back to their customer? It's just a market shift that we're kind of in the middle of?
I can't tell you what their business structure would look like, but I can tell you that we're not the first one to launch this pilot program. We're the only one that launched it in Florida. CORD is working with City of Omaha and City of Aspen already, and I can tell you they've been working with San Francisco. So a lot of the larger city that has been dealing with these issues over the years has already shifted their model to something like a reservations, just so they can mitigate from a safety standpoint. But I do see that it is going to be a shift.
Understood. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right, so when are you coming back to the commission?
Next week?
Really?
Yeah. Next week, we are planning on coming back to the City Commission with
Okay.
the fee structure as it's presented today.
All right, very good. All right, thank you for the presentation. Look forward to hearing more. This looks like a pretty exciting program. Although when I dialed in that number and did the WPB thing, nothing happened. What
Yeah.
was supposed to happen?
You're supposed to get a link, but no, it did not work. Then I will make sure that it's available.
When I noticed there's a typo, it's the last two numbers on the slide said 02, and then later on, down below, it said the last two numbers were 22.
I will make sure that you get the right text number.
I'm not delivering any packages this today. I'll be all right. Okay, thank you. I don't have anything on the mayor's matters. Commissioners, it's been a pretty long morning. I want to thank each and every one of you for adjusting your schedules to make it happen. Are there any matters good for the body? Okay, hearing none, I will declare this work session adjourned. Thank you all so much.